Sorry about not uploading earlier. As you might have noticed, I've changed locations. My exams are finally finished, so I've been spending the weekend traveling home and getting settled back in. Now I'm finally ready to get another video out for everyone. So I've reviewed both 13 Reasons Why and The End of the Fucking World. As you'll know if you watched my videos, I really enjoyed The End of the Fucking World's dreamlike surrealism and did not like how many of the plot points throughout 13 Reasons Why were deeply unrealistic to the point of being silly. From an outside perspective, this might seem a bit confusing. How can you be cool with the lack of realism in one show and then condemn it in another? Isn't that hypocritical? What's the difference between an entertaining, over-the-top plot that's unrealistic in an enjoyable way and a show rife with plot points that are unrealistic in a bad way? So I wanted to unpack that a little bit and lay down a couple of basic ground rules for what makes for good and for bad unrealism. So first of all, what is unrealism? I'm using it here to refer to any situation that could not or would not happen in real life. This can be more fantastical elements like magic and superpowers, as well as media that plays with physics like what we see in Looney Tunes, but also more real-life situations that are simply over the top, as we see in a lot of comedies. Of course, these rules aren't going to be all-encompassing, as there are always going to be exceptions with things like this, but hopefully this will provide a general framework for explaining the difference between being unrealistic in a good way and in a bad way. So no movie or television show is ever going to perfectly reflect real life, and that's a good thing. Otherwise, we would have a lot of TV shows about adults with completely average lives in which nothing too significant ever really happened. The biggest upset of the season would be that Steve got promoted to assistant manager of Costco instead of George. We wouldn't have movies with superheroes or aliens because those aren't realistic, but we accept these premises when they're presented to us because we have to if we want to enjoy the movie. I mean, Luke Skywalker fighting a bunch of stormtroopers can be pretty awesome. No one wants to be that person going,
Actually, you can't make weapons out of light. It's impossible. Learn some real physics, George Lucas.
But in all these cases, there's a reason to have elements that don't reflect real life. These reasons don't always have to be anything super deep or philosophical either. They can simply be because it's cool or because it creates a distinctive style. For instance, the fight scenes in the Kingsman movies or anything that Quentin Tarantino puts out are very deliberately over the top. This makes them visually distinctive. When you go to see a Quentin Tarantino movie, you're perfectly aware that you're going to get a gory bloodbath. The lack of realism is part of the appeal. So it doesn't have to be anything super deep, but it also can be. For example, the film Edward Scissorhands uses a larger-than-life situation to give the audience commentary on suburbia and the way that it treats difference. Sure, you could illustrate the same theme with a more low-key story about ordinary teenagers, but the way that the movie sets up a stark contrast between the pastel, cookie-cutter nature of the neighborhood and everything about Edward communicates it much more strongly. The decision was clearly well thought out. On the other hand, what happens if you introduce in weird or unrealistic elements without giving those elements proper consideration? You get something like Indiana Jones 4 putting in aliens at the end of an otherwise unrelated movie for no reason. The reason that having aliens in Indiana Jones 4 garners criticism, but no one gets mad at there being aliens in Alien, is because in the former, there's no reason for them to be there. Essentially, there is absolutely nothing wrong with having elements that don't reflect reality. And oftentimes, these elements can make a formerly mediocre piece of media 10 times better by making it more distinctive, more interesting, or more able to communicate themes about humanity. By adding unrealistic elements to a story, you can in fact highlight themes or aspects of real life to better illustrate your point. But like all elements in film and TV, these elements need to be well-reasoned and well thought out in order to work. If your movie or show is trying to make specific commentary about a real-world issue, not portraying that issue in a realistic way is likely to delegitimize the entire media. You can still have cool, over-the-top themes in your show, but the heart of what it's trying to say should be grounded in reality if you want that message to land. For example, my favorite show of all time, Avatar: The Last Airbender, is not realistic by any stretch of the mind. It's literally about people who can shoot fire out of their hands. But besides it being a fantastic deconstruction of the chosen one trope, it's also about family and interpersonal relationships. This is where the show knows when to be grounded. We can cheer with these characters as they learn how to earthbend or redirect lightning or defeat an enemy, but we're the most connected to them when the show connects with its central theme. When it's trying to make commentary about family, about love, or about forgiveness, it hits you hard. The show finds its heart in moments like Zuko confronting his abusive father and finally announcing that he's not trying to win his approval, or Zuko apologizing to his uncle, expecting to be turned away and receiving unconditional love and forgiveness, or Zuko finally defeating his sister in combat and instead of celebrating, feeling pity, or actually, I might just really like Zuko. But this isn't exclusive to any one character. Even though the situations they're in are outlandish to us, the bonds they make with each other are very real. Which means that when the show is trying to tell you something about family, it feels plausible and earned. And again, the fantasy elements here don't conflict with the central theme. Rather, they're a device through which we can explore these relationships in an engaging way. For instance, Uncle Iroh teaching Zuko how to redirect lightning is not only important plot-wise, but also symbolizes Zuko learning to let go of his anger instead of using it to hurt others. The unrealism here makes the show's themes of family and personal conflict much stronger. Or take Brooklyn Nine-Nine, a fantastic comedy show created by Mike Schur about a group of police officers in Brooklyn. Many of the things on that show would never happen in a real police station. For example, every Halloween the characters have an annual game comprised of dramatic, ridiculous stunts and over-the-top role-playing to be crowned an amazing detective/genius. Of course, this would never really happen, but it's an ensemble comedy show. The show's central theme isn't actually about the police work, it's about the characters and their relationship to one another, plus some fun references to Die Hard. So having these silly moments doesn't delegitimize or weaken anything that the show is trying to say. The relationships have built so much that they even use one of these Halloween episodes as a way for one of the characters to, at long last, propose to the other. Sure, if Brooklyn Nine-Nine was trying to give us a nuanced depiction of real police work, this would weaken it. But as it is, this actually strengthens the show's central themes. And on the rare occasions where Brooklyn Nine-Nine does make commentary about police work in this day and age, with all the concerning elements of racism and gun violence, it hits home and gets real. In the episode Moo Moo, Brooklyn Nine-Nine tackles racial profiling and does it with surprising candor and realism. There are no goofy stunts here. Instead, we get a poignant conversation between characters Terry and Holt, where they discuss how they've dealt with racism on the job in the past. Episodes where they're intentionally trying to target the realities of police work are far and few, and on these occasions, their job is dealt with much more seriousness than usual. In short, the show doesn't let its goofy, less realistic side hamper the point of the show, instead it enhances it. On the other hand, when this doesn't happen, you get something like 13 Reasons Why. The core message of the show is about suicide and bullying, so the fact that it doesn't portray either of those things realistically is a big problem. When it gives you situations like a school-wide group text freaking out over a tame panty shot, or a group of dumb jock stereotypes losing their shit over some poetry that was published in the school newspaper, the audience is going to get kind of incredulous. The problem is, this stuff isn't supplementary to the show's main theme, it is the show's main theme. 13 Reasons Why exists to talk about bullying and suicide, so it's especially noticeable when these things aren't portrayed in a way that resonates with people. In short, if your media is trying to say something pertinent about the real world, and yet in its message it's so divorced from reality that we can't connect to it or learn anything from what it's trying to say, it's probably not going to work. Putting characters in situations that we've never personally experienced, like fighting aliens or suddenly gaining superpowers, can be pretty great, as long as those characters are still grounded in reality. For example, take The Incredibles. They give us these really familiar archetypes representing a stereotypically traditional family. These are characters that we know because we've seen them everywhere. Most of us growing up knew the shy teenage girl or the dad who was worried that he peaked long ago. We might even be these characters. We see them facing these big struggles like fighting supervillains, but we also get to see them struggle with more personal things that we can relate to. And in some ways, these bigger, less realistic challenges can not only serve for cool action flick material, but also as an allegory for the more personal, relatable problems. Maybe none of us have had to suppress our superpowers at school so that larger society will accept us, but many of us have felt that way about other major parts of our identities. So even if we can't relate to Helen Parr's struggle with taking down an Omnidroid, we can still understand and care about them in other ways because the characters themselves are grounded. There are, of course, exceptions to this, and we can oftentimes love characters because they're larger than life. Look at pretty much anyone Tim Curry plays. But there still needs to be some human driving force behind them that all of us can connect with if you want to create a compelling story. So what about when this principle isn't followed? Well, you get something like the new Heathers adaptation, in which every character is over the top with nothing to connect them back to reality. They're delivering lines like, "You're such an Ugg boot latte," non-stop. These lines were sparing and memorable in the original Heathers, but here, the lack of emotional connectability to any of these characters makes it hard to care about anything that happens on that show. I don't feel bad when Red Heather is poisoned, I don't feel bad when Veronica's reputation is threatened, and I don't feel bad when Yellow Heather gets caught hooking up with her teacher. Why would I? The show's dedication to evoking aesthetic unrealism at the cost of character growth means that I have no reason to care about them. Or, say, Supernatural, a show that doesn't just beat the dead horse, it sends it to purgatory, brings it back without a soul, kills it again, and makes it haunt the glue factory. The show used to do a fairly good job of demonstrating the relationship between its two main characters, brothers Sam and Dean. It was about them traveling across the country and killing demons and monsters while dealing with their own interpersonal conflict and past fallings out. The supernatural elements were fun in their own right and as a way to showcase their issues, but as the show started to drag longer and longer and longer past its expiration date, they started to run out of material. This means that they end up rehashing the same conflicts over and over again. Sam lies to Dean, Dean bottles up his emotions, they go behind each other's backs for their own goods. It's all stuff we've seen before. Their relationship has nowhere else to go. Similarly, the unrealistic elements start to fail too. They keep trying to up the stakes every season, even when there's nowhere bigger to go from there, meaning that every single villain starts being introduced like, remember Satan? Here's Satan's twice as evil cousin Steve, who's conveniently never been mentioned before. The fighting demons side of the show is no longer even fun in its own right. The unrealism is also no longer used as a way to explore the more tangible interpersonal side of the show. Instead, it's become stale and worn out. Creating characters that are relatable and real is essential because that way, even when they're having outlandish adventures that we as an audience might not be able to personally relate to, we're still with them every step of the way. We can even imagine ourselves in their place. That's why sometimes a surreal aesthetic can make a show great and memorable, whereas elsewhere it damages our enjoyment of the show. Every piece of media is going to have to introduce in unrealistic elements at some point or the other, but much like you need to carefully consider plot, characterization, and everything else that goes into making something great, these elements need to be well considered. They need to be there for a reason and make the media better. Even if they don't directly supplement your work's central theme, they need to, at a bare minimum, not directly contradict it. Finally, no matter how outlandish of a situation your characters are put in, we need to be able to connect to the characters themselves, or the whole thing will just fall flat. If you're thinking of making your protagonist a dragon who lives in a cave and hoards gold, go for it. But make sure there's something human behind those scales.